Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 11 of Putting the Horse First. On this podcast, I'm going to introduce you to Michelle Martin. Now, I met Michelle on a Facebook group for treeless saddles. I've been trolling Facebook groups looking for people willing to come on my podcast and talk about horses and their journey for horses and what they've learned from it. And I will just quote a text she sent me. She said that she's had an educational evolution that the horses have gifted her. She believes she is a much more evolved, compassionate, patient, and understanding person because of all the horses have taught her. So I think that's a pretty excellent summary of what our discussion is about. She talks about everything that she learned and all the ways that she's changed in the time that she's owned horses. We discuss the difference between goals and expectations and how to make those things work for you and not against you. Michelle came to horses as an adult, so I found that very interesting to hear how she learned what she's learned and what that has been like for her. We compare that to what that was like for me. I started with horses as a kid. Just one brief warning, there is one quick mention of childhood trauma here, just so that you know about that. But Michelle and I had a nearly hour-long conversation that I really enjoyed and I got a lot out of, and I hope you get a lot out of it too. Thank you for listening.
You were starting to tell me how you got into horses, which you didn't do until you're an adult.
Yeah, I didn't do it until I was adult. They came into my life when I was almost 40. Yeah, I had wanted them all my life, and my husband had went to buy some tools from a gentleman who was losing his home, and he saw some horses, and he didn't think they looked like they were in the best shape, and he asked the gentleman what he was doing with them, and he said, "I'm leaving them here."
Yeah.
And so he came home, and our neighbor was actually grown up with horses, and he said, "Do you think, she would be willing to help with these horses?" And I said, "Well, I want the horses, and he said, "Well, they're free." And little did I know there is no such thing as a free horse. And so she went with us and she said, "Yeah, these horses are in really bad shape." And so took the plunge and found a barn to take them to. The gentleman was very sweet. He had a horse trailer, and he came and picked them up for us because they were only a couple of miles from the barn we found. And that started it. And one of the first horses, his name was Big Asa. He really took me deep into horse communication and back into my intuition that I always felt was very strong when I was a little girl with my dogs. And I kept hearing things, but I didn't understand where they were coming from. But he was so clearly communicating with me. And I would say, "Why am I getting this message? Like, where is this coming from?" And he would reinforce it time and time and time again. And I was like, "This horse is freaking talking to me. He's talking." And I remembered speaking with my dogs when I was young, and I've always been an animalaholic. I absolutely have always resonated more with dogs and animals than people, but I still, I don't know if it's kind of just grown out of us and because of society and the way that we're not as in tune with Mother Nature that we just kind of forget or lose that ability. He really brought me back to that. And so he kind of opened up that side of all of it. And then each subsequent horse has taught me a lot of really great lessons. And I really feel like I'm a much, much better human being because of all the horses that have come into my life. They've really changed who I am, helped be a catalyst for me to change who I am. I've dove into a lot of subjects because of subsequent things that the horses were showing me. Banner was my third horse, and he had awful hooves. He had been metal shod all his life with plates, and when a shoe would come off, which was quite frequent, he was just dead crippled. And so that kind of shoved me down the whole barefoot journey and hooves and learning about hoof anatomy and trying to figure out how to bring some comfort into his life. And that took me into boots, and now I'm diving into glue-ons and just all kinds of things, because I have a Pentabian. His name is Dreamer, and he has incredible hooves, but he actually foundered in 2018, and he took me down the whole nutrition path. I really feel like each of them has been willing to go down some very hard roads in order for my education and learning, which in return has helped me live a fuller, richer, healthier life. So it's been a fascinating journey. Right now, Buckaroo, big, brawny, brown quarter horse that is a bulldozer. He is teaching me, because Banner and Dreamer are butterflies, and butterflies can have their own challenges, but they tend to be, in my opinion, a little bit easier. But bulldozers, they make you dig a little deeper to find a way to communicate with them to where you don't have to always match their hard energy. That's kind of what he's teaching me right now, is how can you come at me as soft as you can and still have an effect when I'm such a bulldozer? Very challenging. So Banner was a big, big, big round quarter horse. And I noticed the saddles seemed very uncomfortable for him. And so I started riding him in a bareback pad. I also was in the generation of growing up with a lot of metal in my mouth, headgear, retainers, braces. And so bits did not resonate with me because of that, because I grew up with so much metal in my mouth. I'm not anti anything. I just personally could not resonate with bits because of all of what I had went through as a child. And it's not that any of it was necessarily traumatic. I just remember how uncomfortable it all was. And so I started diving deep into being bitless with Banner. And a lot of people thought I was crazy because he was a pretty forward, flighty, kind of strong guy. But we would go out just privately, me and him, in the fields around the house. I've always kind of depended more on relationship and connection than what most people consider the basics and groundwork and like probably should be done. I just kind of dove into it with my own hippie kind of fruthy la la woo woo ness and just said, and it's worked for me. That's the incredible part. To tell you the truth, I am not saying that the basics aren't so important. And I will say, with the caveat, that all the horses that have come into my life have been previously trained by somebody else. I've never started a horse from scratch. So I always want to be very transparent in what I'm saying. But I've never really continued with any of it. I just go out, spend a ton of time. I absolutely love hiking and walking with my horses. And I usually do a lot of that before I do ride with them. It hasn't always worked out that way, but for the most part, it's a pretty equal blend of each. And I've just relied on that. And I've learned so much about walking with them as I have of riding with them. And so I noticed with Banner that, the saddle just didn't seem comfortable with him. And it didn't seem comfortable with me. And it was so heavy because I was riding in a big Western heavy saddle. And so I got a bareback pad and I loved it. But I could tell that if I was ever to be like out on the trail and doing anything more extreme, that it probably wouldn't necessarily give me the stability, because I didn't have that luxury of growing up with horses and being that girl that learned bareback, and I would ride bareback, but I never really felt very comfortable at a trot, and definitely not at a canter or anything. I just couldn't seem to keep my balance. And so I ordered my first treeless saddle, which was a Bob Marshall, and I didn't care for it at all. It's nothing against Bob Marshall's saddle, just didn't resonate or fit my body in the way that I hoped it would. And then I ordered an Easy Fit. They are a treeless brand through an Amish man in Pennsylvania.
Oh, really?
And I've actually been riding in that for almost 15 years now, and I'm just now diving into even stepping up that a bit, and I'm probably going to get a ghost saddle now, a ghost treeless saddle, because now I'm kind of going down the endurance road. Wanting to do endurance, and because I've never been anybody into like the arena and showing and any of those things. None of that has ever appealed to me. I'm a real adventurous, go get lost in the woods and never come back kind of girl. I always wanted to be Pocahontas growing up and, just disappear in the woods with a wolf and a bear and a horse, just fantasy land, and so that's kind of what resonates with me. And so I recently met an endurance pair that live in my neck of the woods, and she's been teaching me a lot about endurance and fitness. And which is so important for Dreamer because of the founder, and he needs the exercise, and because he's an Arabian and he's already, been subject to insulin resistance and borderline PPID. And I didn't treat any of it with any kind of medication because I'm kind of anti medications. I would rather always find Mother Nature's solution to something with either herbs or just the correct nutrition and lifestyle for horse. And so, I'm really big into herd environment and as much space as possible. So we moved from the 1 acre that we had bought when the horses originally came into our lives and thought it was gigantic because I'd lived in suburbia all my life. But then quickly the walls felt like they were closing in on us because before long we had 3 horses. And so we moved where we live now, and now we have 12 acres. And we've kind of set it up in a paddock paradise, but again, I'm not a real structure-y, follow the norm kind of girl. So it's kind of laid out in a big circle around the inner sanctum of where the house and stuff is.
Gotcha.
It really provides a lot of movement for them. And it's also can be sectioned off with gates when the springtime comes, and I can't let them just be on full flush spring grass. But I live in California. So we usually have 6 months of brown and 6 months of green. This last year was lovely. We had a very long, luscious winter. So it's more like 8 months of green. But when it turns brown, and then it's very safe for almost any horse. So that's a luxury. Yeah, that's a luxury because I know that in your wetter climates, you deal with the green all year round. And so a more formal track might be necessary in order to keep horses that are more grass sensitive or easy keepers, which all of mine are, off. But because of the brown, ours is pretty darn safe, and they can pretty much eat as much as they want, and they really just don't get fat from it. So it's pretty much of a luxury. So do you have any questions? Because I'll just keep talking and talking and talking.
No, I have. So I'm dying to know. So you found somebody to board the first 2 horses. How long did the boarding last? And I presume those horses were older and they've now at this point.
Yeah. So the neighbor took 1 horse, I took the other as like a financial thing. And the one that I took was pretty much not a beginner horse in any way, shape, or form. The other horse that was the one, his name was Big Asa. He was the one who ended up coming to me, and she let me have him when we bought our place. But I would say we boarded for 6 months to a year. I can't quite remember exactly, and I never missed a day. I came home from work, and the first thing I did was drive out there. And soon I just wanted to live with them so badly. And barn politics kind of came into it, and I started to kind of see, how other people were and how I didn't necessarily resonate with it, but I was so darn green that it was good for me to be around people and to learn. But it didn't necessarily resonate with me. And they did end up having, in the beginning, they got put into some stalls because Big Asa was actually really in really bad shape. The vet had to come out. He had a sand impaction that was enormous because they had been basically starved to death. And so they were living on deep, deep sand. So the vet came and did the whole, mineral oil, the tube, and just took mounds of sand out of him. Yeah. Wow. He probably wouldn't have lasted more than a couple of weeks where he was. He probably would have died. And Red was the other horse. And I could tell he wanted to like me, and he wanted to be good to me, but I don't think anybody had ever been good to him. And so he just didn't have that capacity. And so he'd be okay for a little while, and then he'd just buck me off. And my friend would tell me, "You have to try to hold on." I said, "I'm trying to hold on," but I didn't have any riding skills behind me. I'm a very athletic person, so I had that going for me. But riding is different than any other sport you've ever had in your life. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I would just boom pop out, and so I became very scared of him. So we've ended up letting our house get foreclosed on in suburbia. This is how much I wanted to live with my horses. My credit was actually one of the most important things in my life. And because of the horses, I let my house get foreclosed on in suburbia because it was during the recession, the 2008, 2009, where everybody was letting their houses go. And so I'm not ashamed to admit I jumped on that bandwagon, let my house go. My parents their house was paid for, so they were able to put the house that we bought with the 1 acre in their name. And we purchased the 1 acre. And then when we moved there, my friend said, well, you can go ahead and take Big Asa too, because he was older. And she said, he's the perfect horse for you. He's going to be so kind to you. He's going to teach you. And Red is really not the safe horse for you. And so I had no desire to get rid of him, because for me, animals are pretty much life. If I take them on, I've had a couple of incidents where I had to move an animal on, but for the most part, when they're in my life, they're forever. And so Red actually ended up getting internal pigeon fever. Have you ever heard of it?
Well, I've heard of pigeon fever, and yes, internals, they get abscesses in their guts.
Yes, they do. So like I said, each horse has taught me about a lot of different subjects, and it's rare. It's really rare for a horse to get it internally, but I think because they were so compromised and so starved to death, he was probably very vulnerable to it taking over more so inside of his body. And pigeon fever is pretty prevalent in California, I think in the West in general. I think we have more of an issue of it than you do back east, but I'm not 100% sure about. That's how it used to be, is from what I've read. That's how it used to be. I think it's spread across the states, but so he actually ended up dying from that. The vet came out and said he literally lost probably 200 pounds in less than a couple of weeks. It was absolutely scary. And so the vet said, the best thing to do is probably, put him down. And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because, I never would have probably been okay with him. And, my whole desire at that point was to ride. I hadn't really dove deep into all the relationship and everything that a horse could bring to you outside of riding necessarily. So, and he probably would have hurt me, because I don't have a lot of fear. So I probably wouldn't have given up on him, and he probably would have done a lot of damage to me. And then Banner was actually the neighbor's horse, and when Red got put down, Big Asa would go and hang out next to him where his little stall was. And they just seemed bonded, even though they couldn't touch each other. Big Asa would never leave the fence line, and they would just sit there. And so one day I happened to talk to the neighbor, and she said, oh, he's for sale. And she said, he's been diagnosed navicular, but never took a lame step in his life. I had no idea what navicular even was, never heard the word. So, here comes Greenie. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And he's this beautiful tri-colored paint, and all I see is the flashy gloriness.
Ooh, take my check.
Yeah. Yeah. So I took him, and I don't regret it for a minute. He's 28 years old now, and most people would have put him down a long time ago. And I finally found a way of trimming, which, if you don't mind me saying, I'll say, through David Landreville.
Okay.
His trimming has made the absolute biggest difference for Banner than anything ever has. And believe me, I have run the gamut with him of pretty much anything and everything. And at 28 years old, with about as much internal long-term damage as you can imagine, this horse is sounder than he has ever been. Barefoot, no drugs. We stayed at that place for about 5 years. We took in one more horse named Bullet at the time. So we had Big Asa, Banner, and Bullet. And that's when we decided to sell that place and then move up to where we live now and get the 12 acres.
One of the things about where we are currently with the internet and everybody studying things, there's so many potential options that maybe might help your horse that it can drive a lot of people nuts. Like if you're a professional or someone like you who's got their own little self-guided long-term horse research project lifestyle,
Yes.
their whole lifestyle is about learning all of these things. It can be a really amazing journey, or it can drive you insane because
it's done both.
Because you can sometimes, you find something and you get the right fix, and all of a sudden the animal is just totally good. You finally found the problem, but there's so many options now, it can drive you nuts. I mean, I also do the barefoot. My guy, I've got a 17 one-hand Dutch harness gelding, and he is barefoot. I was trimming him myself. I got a farrier like 7 months ago. He's so big that just the forces, he's kind of got perpetual thrush high up in the wall. Just because at his weight, he's just pushing his feet apart. His feet were just getting ever wider. I'm like, this is probably not right here. Love the barefoot thing. And we've been a couple more upper level international Grand Prix jumper riders who have decided to go barefoot.
That's one of the things about endurance is that you're riding sometimes 25, 50, 100 miles. And I live very close to where Tevis is.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And the majority of them do glue-ons, and they're barefoot. And the glue-ons are, basically like just a hoof protection that's flexible with the hoof, and it's not a metal rigid, part. And again, I'm not trying to be anti-shoe, but if you look into the history of shoes, I mean, they go back thousands of years.
Yeah.
And most people are willing to understand that things that worked thousands of years ago have been updated now, and just life in general. And yet somehow the rigid metal horseshoe has hung on.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's so many other options now that I'm not, I get a little bewildered why somebody would still be using metal that has so much concussion that why they would still choose to use it. And I think it's just because it's worked. And the horses that they've been fortunate to have in their lives, like Dreamer, I'm sure I could put metal shoes on Dreamer and he'd probably be fine for a very long time, because he just, regardless of all of the mistakes I have made with him and foundered him and everything, his feet have still bounced back and are still some of the strongest, healthiest hooves I've ever had the privilege of riding with. And so he's probably a horse that you could get away with that for a lifetime. And he might not ever necessarily, show you any signs. But, also when you ride with metal shoes, the foot is not necessarily alive and functioning the way it would. The blood flow's not there. So the horse is almost walking on dead material, and so that's what Banner was. I mean, Banner's feet, literally, I don't think they felt a thing. And then when the shoe would come off and the blood flow would start to return, he was just crippled. It was just sad, very, very sad. And so I thought to myself, well, there's got to be a better way, and again, because I had the fortunateness, I mean, the unfortunate, but the fortunateness of not growing up with horses. I didn't have any of that, normal of what people have seen throughout their lives going against me. Plus, I'm really strong-headed. I really go with my own gut and my own opinion. And like you said, everybody has an opinion, and everybody's opinion is different on every single subject when it comes to horses, whether that be a treed saddle or a not treed saddle, barefoot, metal shoes, glue-on shoes, boots, nutrition, vaccines, wormers. I mean, you name it. Some people believe you shouldn't ride horses, and I do believe there's a lot of horses out there that probably shouldn't be ridden. They don't care for it at all. And I have one of those. Bullet was always a horse that just kind of went with it, but he didn't really want to be ridden. And now, and then I found Liberty through him. And he had an absolute blast doing Liberty. And I saw him come out of shutdown because he taught me about shutdown and how a horse who you think is dead broke is really just internally a robot that's just going through the motions because they don't have another choice. And so through Liberty and positive reinforcement, which I also put my own spin on because I'm just so not rigid when it comes to any things with the horses. So I love to learn and take a concept and then just put my own spin on it and do what works for me and that particular horse.
Yeah.
And with Bullet, he would get too muggy with the treats. And I know there's ways of dealing with that now. And I realize I was not necessarily following any kind of positive reinforcement protocols. But what I ended up doing is making a treat station. So I would leave the treats over on like a mounting block that I had. We would go and we would do our things. And then if something spectacular would happen, then I'd run over to the mounting block and they would run with me all joyfully. And then they would get a couple of treats. And it kind of took that whole anticipation mugging thing out of it. And because I almost feel like with positive reinforcement, you almost turn it also into like a treat robot. And I didn't like that feeling. And I know it can be done differently. I'm not at all saying that because I know I've seen it, but that's what I was personally feeling from it. And so I liked the treat station. That ended up being my solution to that. And so, and then with Buckaroo, he's a big mugger too. So, little by little, I taught him to take a step back and then 2 steps back and then to hold. And, I worked out a little bit of different stuff with him. And so, yeah, it's just, it's been really fun to learn from the internet, like you said, because there's such a plethora of amazing information, but then still stay true to my gut and find what works for me in my, personal setting with the 4 horses that are currently in my life,
And that's a really big important point is that, and it was been really interesting for me to watch the positive reinforcement people over the past 15 years and how the narrative has changed. And unfortunately, positive reinforcement in the beginning was getting picked up by people who had your typical horse trainer people with very assertive personalities. And they were kind of positive reinforcement training saying, this is the most scientific proven, horse friendly method. And you must do this because the science says so. And the whole thing. So I found the people attracted to it were like, I was like, and they were not allowing any space for the kind of thing that you found, which is depending upon your personality, the horse's personality, your experience, the horse's experience, your daily protocols would be very different. Like what you yourself. So people have to give themselves permission to do that. But there's definitely a group of people who are more comfortable as self-guided learners and other people who just either don't want or they won't, or it's not what they want out of horses. Like they want horses to be a time when they come and they don't want it to be challenging. They don't want it to be work. Like that's not what they're into horses for. So so a lot of this new cool stuff, if you can sell that to them as an immediate solution to something, then fine. But they're not interested in spending a year learning, developing their own self-guided protocol is not something we want to do.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I have is the extreme luxury privilege. And I'm so grateful that I get to live with my horses. Yeah. And that makes a huge difference because if you go to a barn every day, it does bring in a whole other realm of like, you do kind of go there with an agenda and things that you want to get done and do. And it doesn't necessarily facilitate just that hangout vibe. I'm not saying it's like that for everybody, but I kind of felt that way back when I would go to the barn. Okay, like what am I going to do today? What am I going to do with the horses? And when I live with them, it's just kind of like we just live and flow together. And these beautiful things arise that they show me. And and of course I've evolved. Well, I feel like I have evolved through it. And I've realized how incredibly, like I said, important relationship is. And I really, excuse my French, but when shit hits the fan, I'll take relationship over a robotic horse any day of the year, because Buckaroo, I believe, came from a situation further down south in California where there's feral pigs. And he's very, very, very intimidated by livestock, which is not necessarily a good quality in a giant quarter horse. But I don't do any kind of cow chasing or anything with him. And we were out on the trail one day in a place where they let cattle free range. And we came around some bushes, so it was completely hidden, and there was a giant black cow. Well, what does that say to a horse that's afraid? That says, that's a giant black bear. Run for your life. And I felt every fiber of his being wanting to spin and burn and leave me in the dust. And I literally felt it just in a minute, just nanosecond. All of that thought go through his head, like, I'm going to hurt her if I do that. And I said, Buckaroo, I know you're scared to death. Let me get off. Let me get off. Just let me get off. And he just froze, and I could feel his body just almost trembling underneath me, like, hurry, hurry, hurry. I can't hold it much longer. And I jumped off. And as soon as I jumped off, he's like, okay, you'll protect me, right? And I'm like, yes, I'll protect you. I got this. And it was literally, it's goosebumpy to me to this day, because he's just not that kind of horse. Dreamer is that kind of horse. He's a caretaker horse deep in his soul. Deep in his soul. That's who he is. Buckaroo, that's not who he is. But because of the relationship that we have built together, I could tell he was like, turn and burn. And then he was like, no, I got to think about Michelle. She's on my back. I'll hurt her. I'll kill her. It won't be good. And so that was one of those moments that will just be cemented in my brain forever. And that's why I would literally take relationship over any kind of training. Not that I don't think training is important, because I do. And I do certain things, but I'll give you one more example. Dreamer, like I said, he's a butterfly, and where we live, a lot of the trails have a lot of cattle gates you have to go through. And he never cared for the gates. And he would be very afraid when I would open them from the saddle, that when they were coming at him. So instead of fight with him, it's not that I don't keep asking. I'll ask usually 3, maybe 4 times, but I'm not going to sit there and get in a fight with my horse over it. If they tell me, hey, I just can't do this, it's scaring the crap out of me, then I'm like, okay, well, there's no reason why I can't jump off of you. Now, I do ride treeless, so I don't mount from the ground. But Dreamer's superpower is he will side up to anything and stand like a statue. Doesn't matter what it is. So there's no reason for me not to just hop on and off at any given moment. So I'd say for several months, I hopped off at every gate, didn't try to fight with him. I'd ask, and he'd say, oh, gosh, that's just overwhelming and too hard. And then all of a sudden one day, he just did it like he'd been doing it as a ranch horse all his life. And I was like, what is going on right now? Why are you able to do this gait like effortlessly? And again, I just ride in a simple little halter, just soft, and I literally, it was like a feather in my hand. And he acted like he'd been doing gaits all his life. And I was like, how did you do this? I never taught him. I never came home and drilled him on it. I never did a thing. And now he literally can do gaits without any effort at all. And it just blows my mind. Same thing with bridges. We have some big bridges that have to be crossed. And he was scared to death of one of them. And I would ask him to go over it, and he would say, I can't do it. I can't do it. But this horse trusts me from the ground, almost implicitly, And so one day I could tell he was like, I'm so freaking scared, but stay on. I'm going to do it. And he got across that bridge. And on the other side, I could tell he was just beaming with pride and just like, look, I did it for you. I did it. You didn't have to get time. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're so lovely. And I'm really into positive affirmation with my horses. I I think I went on a big word quest a couple years ago and realized that so many of us humans say so many things that we don't necessarily mean, even not even saying anything negative, but just communication between me and my husband. I would notice I'd be like, wow, I
Yeah.
used like 3 words there and expected you to know what I was talking about. And so we have this funny saying between us, use your words. Like, can you
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit more on what you're saying? Because you're like, can you get that thing for me when you're done with that thing? And it's like, what? Huh? You know? And so I realized how much that people will say just flippantly, oh, that stupid horse, or he's being stupid right now, or
Yeah.
he's such a dum dum, he's not using his brain. And I just I don't care for it. I really love to build the horse up and just give as absolute much positive affirmation as I can. And if they can't do something, I say to them, this is really difficult for you right now, huh? You're finding this intimidating. This is stressful for you. Let me help you in any way that I can. I never take it as them doing something to me. I always take it as them needing me to figure out a way to help them. I think that's the biggest thing that I've come to, is that you can't ever take what the horse is doing personally. Yes, we all have tempers. I still get mad and I still screw up all the time. Banner, I was trimming him the other day and he had a giant black horsefly on his butt and he was kicking out as I had his hoof. And I got up and I smacked his booty with my hand and I said, why are you doing that? And then I saw the big black fly. So
Yeah.
it's not that I never screw up, but I try to take those in and then say, oh, get back
Yeah.
to that peaceful,
Yeah.
beautiful place and listen to your heart. I feel like I've never gone wrong if I just listen to the horse. When I lose that, that's when I lose myself and I lose trust. I don't know if you know Elsa Sinclair.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and I love her expression of money in the bank, trust in the bank, and I draw on that a lot. I love to put a lot in and then take a lot out, and then I love to put a lot in and I know I take a lot out. And she also has a great expression for Buckaroo of being dominance addicted, and I had never heard of it described that way when I call him a bulldozer, but that's what he is. He's dominance addicted, and when I would really lay the smack down with him, he would just melt like a puppy. And I'd be like, I don't want to have to come to you that way. I want to be able to communicate with you. I keep striving for a better balance with him, a softer approach.
Yeah. And when I think of quarter horses, I usually think of that they are bred to push into and pull against cows. That they're physically and mentally bred to do is brace into the ground and either push or brace into the ground and pull. And that's part of what they're bred to do. So
I love that.
So when we try to go against that breeding, we're really a challenge set up. I love the dominance addicted phrase because I have seen more than a few people take their horses home. One of the things with the boarding barns is people are social. And before they even know it, they are criticizing and competing with each other. And it's just something that happens. It's so innate in people, whether it's innate in people or whether we really trained ourselves to be that way. But I mean, all those human things come into effect when you're at a barn. And then people take their horses home, but they still keep that mindset. And they're like, well, now that I'm home, now I can have control of everything. And I've literally I bought my own farm. Now I can control turnout. Now I can control things. And I'm like, oh boy. And what they invariably do, they fall to their own level. Like, well, they're bought by themselves. So they very quickly find they're afraid to ride because there's no one else around. Like if they happen to fall off, they're not learning from everyone else. By luck, I've been in the horse industry my whole life. And by luck, I mean, I had my first on the books barn manager job when I was like 16. This would have been like 1987 or so. And a lot of time with horses where I was unsupervised. And I just happened to be able to, all right, I'll try this. I'm going to do this. Maybe it worked. Maybe it did not. But I was able to say, okay, well, that didn't go how I thought it would. So we'll do it differently next time. You're on your own and you try stuff out, see what happens. And then you try it again. I didn't realize at that time or even later, it took me a few decades to realize most people did not learn about horses that way. And they were not interested in learning about horses that way. It's tough to fail. It's tough to give yourself permission to experiment. We come up in a very much McDonald's, Walmart, cookie cutter. Everything you do must produce a step forward or you did something wrong. What you tried did not produce a definite step up the staircase towards the eventual summit, that it was wrong. And that's not the way it works.
No, and that's one of the things I love about Warwick is nothing's linear, you know, it's, and then that's been my experience. I take 3 steps back and a couple forward, and then maybe the next time I get to take 3 steps forward and 1 back. And it's hard, really hard when you fail, but I like being really open and transparent about my failures because I feel like it takes the stigmatism away from it. Like when I founded Dreamer, I was literally in my closet crying for almost 2 weeks in the darkness. And finally I said, I have to let this go. I have to start telling people so that I let it be free because I'm letting this darkness consume me. And of course he's down and groaning and it's just a whirlwind of just awfulness. But as soon as I put it out there, I felt the healing start to begin. I had some pretty traumatic things happen when I was young. I was molested, and I've always been very open about it because I feel like being open about it has taken away the control that it had over me. So anytime that I F up or mess up or however you want to say it, I like to put it out there. Sometimes I have to take some time to process it. But as soon as I put it out there, I feel like that's when the real healing begins. And I feel like as a society, like you said, nobody likes to fail. Nobody likes to discuss what they do wrong. But I feel like when I put it out there and I tell my friends and my husband, you know, man, I really screwed up, then it lets me heal and it doesn't stay stuck inside of me in this festering darkness that has a major negative impact on me, you know, because I just say to the world, hey, I screwed up. This is what I did. And then by doing that, maybe I help somebody else not make the same mistake. You know, at a hoof clinic, I took a girl aside and I just said, I just want you to know I'm coming from a place of absolute love and compassion, but I see your horse's sheath is really swollen right now. I see he is really, really heavy. And that's what happened to Dreamer right before he foundered. And I just want you to know, because I don't want anybody to ever go through what I went through. And, you know, I'm sobbing like a baby. I never met this lady in my life, but I would rather tell people about my own crap to maybe help them, but it helps me just as much because we always want to hide our imperfections, but when we put them out there, it frees our souls. It really does. It really does.
That's a whole other really good topic to talk about. That's my goals with this podcast is finding ways that we can either come up with narratives or programs or systems so we can all improve things. And that is one of the big things that's very hard for us to do. Recently, a big famous trainer in Europe, a news agency sent an undercover groom in to video what he's doing. And he was not very amused about this, and he's suing the news agency. And then last year, an event trainer, a video was released, I guess it was a couple of years old. At a clinic, somebody couldn't get the horse in the water complex. So the guy picks up a branch. He doesn't even tell the rider. And he comes up behind and wallops the horse with the branch to get it to jump through. He doesn't even tell the poor rider that this stuff is going on. And I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we could work towards trying to prevent. That event trainer at that clinic needs to be able to say to that rider, you know, we're not going to be able, you're riding for 2 hours at one clinic. We're not going to be able to do this today. Like, this is not something we should be trying to get done. We shouldn't be trying to get your horse on this trailer in the next hour. We shouldn't be trying to force your horse to get into the water now. I should be able to tell this person who paid a lot of money for this fancy horse, your horse is really cool and it can do stuff, but Piaffe, it's never going to have a world. And if we try to get this horse to get a really good score at Piaffe, it's going to start hanging its tongue out the side of its face and grinding its teeth. And a lot of that's the case with a lot of horses. I've had plenty of horses. They do things great, except like I had a great jumper mare. She only jumped plain poles though. Don't try to jump rope or anything else. And maybe there was a solution to that I don't know, but the solution was not to either ruin my relationship or try to get myself killed by trying to beat her over the stuff she didn't want to jump. There's a lot of stuff that she did well, and there was plenty for me to enjoy with her. You know,
Yes.
and maybe I will learn in the future, what I should have known at her. But I was not willing to either risk myself or like ruin my relationship with her to try to make it happen. Stuck here, and that is, yes, I am stuck here.
Yeah, I
There's no,
think that's the hard thing with horses too, and especially maybe more so in your realm is that people put so much money in and then they
yeah,
have these expectations, and that's another thing that I've been working on internally this
yeah,
last couple of years is expectations. When
yeah,
we have expectations, we just set ourselves up for failure.
yeah,
There's nothing wrong with having goals and desires, but when we expect, then that's setting ourselves up for failure. And not every soul that comes into your life is going to be able to live up to the expectations. In fact, probably none of them are. I mean, on some level, like my husband's never going to be able to give me everything I've ever wanted from him. Not one friend is ever going to be able to fulfill everything I need from them.
yeah,
And I've really been working on that. That's been my latest chapter is expectations. They sabotage a lot. They really
yeah,
do. Because and
yeah,
like again, you can exchange expectation for desires and goals and dreams, but
yes,
don't expect it. Don't
yeah,
expect it. Just be open and like you said, just be so thrilled and feel so grateful for what they can give to you,
and yes,
and
yeah,
not every horse is going to be able to do everything that you desire with them. It just, and again, I know it's so hard because we all just can't afford to have 3,000 horses. Say, well, that one will do that, and that one will do that, and that one can do that. I mean, it's a really hard situation, and so I totally understand where people are coming from, but we have to understand too, they're sentient beings. They have their own loves and desires and dislikes, and it's a tough battle of the wills when we want to do one thing and they're like, that doesn't work for me at all.
Kurt Klimke could probably ride most horses on this planet, and I am not going to ride it. But it doesn't mean I can't enjoy my horse and have a great time. And especially now I'm a big Pivo junkie.
I have a Pivo now.
I record everything. I have instructors that I work with in South Africa and Germany. And I was working with 3 instructors from January to July. And then I'm like, okay, that's too much. So I cut it down to just one. She's a Mary Wanless biomechanics certified instructor. I've done a bunch of work with Mary Wanless. I love Mary stuff. And
I absolutely adore her and Gideon.
Yes. So I can live stream with her. Ashley Sanderson is a woman who I'm working with. She lives on the road. She doesn't actually have a home. She goes
Neat.
around the planet. She does lung lining clinics and teaches Mary stuff and probably teaches a few more things too. But I get lessons from her. And I mean, that's such a tremendous to be able to have access to that. I mean, the Pivo is so cheap, it's practically free. And the fact that I can get, when I was in the 1970s, you only had the 1 or 2 stables in town, and those were the people you had to learn from, and that was it. Now you have so many people, it's like, it's too much.
Did you grow up with horses from the time you were a little girl?
A lady, when I was a little kid, I was 7, a lady up the road had always wanted horses, got a horse and put it in her backyard, which she was not allowed to do. And the police came every day.
I love her.
Eventually, she got hooked up with the 4-H system. I was in New York State. And so all of the kids in the neighborhood obviously noticed this lady had a horse in her backyard. So when she got hooked up with 4-H, the parents around were like, well, you got all our kids addicted to your horse. You're taking our damn kids with you to the 4-H meeting because this is
nice.
So I got plugged into a 4-H club, and 4-H was very much about educating you. You're supposed to worm your horse. Everything that they advise is now changed. Now you're not supposed to worm your horse. Yeah, so I got into an educational program, and in that day and age, kids could work off riding. Like they were comfortable dumping a bunch of kids at the barn after school and saying, "Don't die. We don't want to have to bury your body. Like, don't be so obnoxious as to get hurt." Like that was the rule. And
yeah, we grew up in a good generation.
Yeah, a lucky one. So I lucked out.
Yes.
I was able to work in exchange for riding, and I never owned a horse, which is probably a good thing. because they cost too much money. And as you learned, they founder and they get sick. And I didn't know enough. It's probably better. And I got more access to more horses. Working here, working there. Not that I would do it again, but I got to ride. There was a stable in town. They had Tennessee walkers up on stacks. So when I was when I was 17, I got to ride for a year a black stallion up on stack pads. Now,
wow.
Teenager, I just knew I'd get to ride. That's all.
A black stallion. Yeah. I'm there with you.
I don't know what I'm doing. So these people and this trainer, they lived in New York City, and they would come out. They do just like Steinkraus used to. They drive out on Friday night. They'd ride Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But during the week, they had one 20-something-year-old woman who was a barn manager and a couple of obnoxious teenage kids, the run of the damn place, and they were breeding, and they had a couple stallions, and they would go to shows, and they had some wrecking horses, and a bunch of them were all up on pads, and they put them up in the bidding rigs in the stalls, and all kinds of stuff. I'm 17. I don't know. But yeah, it got me exposure to more different kinds of horses than I probably would have had if I had just had my own horse. And I couldn't have anyway. And it also got me into working very early. I was old enough. I had to be, I forget if it was 14 or 16. I can't remember quite now. But there was an age where you could get working papers to say that a doctor had looked at you and said that you could go work on a farm, so you could go do a W-2 job at 14 or 16. There was an exemption for if you're to do agricultural work. So
yes.
I was able to start working quite young, and people what was minimum wage at that point? I think it was $3.75, and then it got raised to like $4.25 by the time I was in high school or something. So they really like cheap help, and provided you were conscientious, they just want a good egg who's going to show up and not smoke pot and bring their friends around. And that was their basic minimum requirement, really. And I had the education from the 4-H program. And so and the willingness to show up and do the work, of course. I was desperate enough to ride. So if you're going to pay me $4 an hour and I get to come ride, that's it.
That's a win-win veggie din. Yeah.
I'll let you go because we've been here for an hour. Thank you so much for the chat here.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.